It's 2008. You just lost your house. Your retirement fund is worth half what it was in January. The bank that holds your mortgage just received $700 billion of your tax money, so it wouldn't collapse. And the guy who sold you that mortgage? The one who looked you in the eye and said this was the smartest decision you'd ever make? He's fine. Moved to Scottsdale. Bought a boat. Named it Liquid Assets. But here's what nobody tells you about the 2008 financial crisis. It wasn't a disaster. Disasters are natural. Earthquakes don't have business cards. This was a relay race. Every person who touched the baton had a reason, a logical, totally defensible reason, to keep running. The broker had a commission. The banker had a bonus. The ratings analyst had a client. The regulator had a philosophy. The homeowner had a dream. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked where the finish line was. There was only the next hand to pass the baton to. So let's run it. From the beginning. And this time, you're holding the baton. It's 2005. You live in Southern California. You sell mortgages for a living, and business has never been this good. You pull into the office at 8 a.m. in a leased BMW. You're 29. The blueprint, if you look closely, if you follow the money, looks an awful lot like it did in 2006. The baton is still out there. Someone is running with it right now. The only question is whether you're watching or whether you're holding it and don't know yet. He drives a delivery truck. She works part-time at a daycare. Combined income, $42,000. They want a 4-bedroom in Riverside. Listing price, $485,000. You know, in some quiet part of your brain, that these people cannot afford this house. But you don't need them to afford it. You need them to sign. Hi, welcome in. So you two are looking at that place on Magnolia, right? We love it. But we're a little worried about the payments. Don't be. Let me show you something. You slide a sheet across the desk. Adjustable rate. 2% for the first 2 years. Monthly payment, $987. That's less than our rent. Exactly. And in 2 years, when the rate adjusts, your house will be worth 20% more. You refinance, lock in a lower fixed rate, and you're golden. What if prices don't go up? You almost laugh. Not because it's funny. Because in 2005, that question sounds like asking what if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow. They've gone up every single year for the last decade. A teacher's pension fund in Wisconsin is about to buy it. A municipal government in Norway will invest in it. They'll never read the fine print. Every year. This is the safest investment in America. They sign. You file the paperwork. Your commission, $14,500. You don't keep the mortgage. That's the beauty. You sell it. Within 72 hours, that loan is off your books and on its way to New York. If this couple defaults in 3 years, you'll never know. You already got paid. And this isn't even the worst loan you've written this month. Last Tuesday, you approved a strawberry picker from Bakersfield. Annual income, $14,000. Loan amount, $720,000. No income verification. No documentation. No questions. They call it a ninja loan. No income, no job, no assets. You call it Tuesday. The mortgage you just sold is now on its way to Wall Street. And Wall Street has plans for it. It's 2006. You're 24, and you just got hired at one of the most powerful investment banks on earth. 41st floor, Lower Manhattan. You can see the Statue of Liberty from the bathroom. Your starting salary is $85,000. Your bonus, your first year, was $140,000. You make more than both your parents combined, and you still don't fully understand what you do. Here's what you do. You take those mortgages, thousands of them, the ninja loans, the no-doc loans, 3 letters, AAA, and they sleep like babies. Step 5. Sell. Call investors worldwide. AAA-rated, 6% yield. The ones given to strawberry pickers, part-time bartenders, and a man in Nevada who listed his occupation as entrepreneur. His primary enterprise was a YouTube channel with 11 subscribers. You take all of them and put them in a blender. Step 1. Collect the ingredients. Buy thousands of mortgages from lenders across the country. Good ones, bad ones, radioactive ones. Doesn't matter. Volume is the game. Step 2. Blend. Pool them into a single product. A mortgage-backed security. The theory, some loans might default, but not all of them. Diversification. Like a fruit salad where a few pieces are rotten, but the rest is fine. Probably. Don't look too close. Step 3. Slice. Cut the pool into layers, tranches. Top tranche gets paid first. Safest. Bottom tranche gets paid last. Riskiest. A wedding cake where the bottom layer is dynamite but the frosting looks gorgeous. Step 4. Get the stamp. Walk the product to a ratings agency. Moody's, S&P, Fitch. You need them to stamp the top tranches AAA, the same rating as U.S. government bonds. You sit down with an analyst. She's been doing this for 6 years. She knows. Treasury bonds pay for. They buy it before you finish the sentence. But your bank isn't done. Someone in a corner office had an idea. But if Moody's won't give you AAA, you walk across the street to S&P. And everyone in that building knows it. This bundle has a 12% subprime concentration. That's within parameters. The underlying documentation is thin. It meets the model thresholds. AAA for the senior tranche. And just like that, a pile of ninja loans from California is rated as safe as a treasury bond. Take the leftover pieces, the lower tranches nobody wanted, and bundle those into a new product. A CDO made of CDOs. A CDO squared. A Xerox of a lie. And somehow, the ratings agency stamped that AAA too. Your managing director walks by your desk. 42 years old. Made $3.8 million last year. How's the pipeline? We packaged 4 deals this week. 2 more closing Friday. Good. The desk needs volume. Don't slow down. What about credit quality? Some of these underlying. He stops walking. Looks at you. Not angry. Amused. We don't care if the mortgages are good. We care if we can sell the product before they go bad. That's not our risk. That's the buyer's risk. He keeps walking. Down the hall, someone mentions a hedge fund manager in San Jose. Guy named Michael Burry, buying credit default swaps. Betting against the very products you're building. Betting the whole thing collapses. Everyone laughs. It's Friday, September 12th, 2008. You work at Lehman Brothers. 6 years. 31st floor. The guy wears shorts to meetings and runs a fund from a basement office. He's not insane. It's late 2006. You work in risk management at a major bank. Your job is to look at the numbers and tell people what they don't want to hear. The numbers are starting to say something. Mortgage delinquencies in Florida, up 9%. Nevada, 11%. Arizona, 14%. The adjustable rate loans from 2004 and 2005 are resetting. Payments doubling. And the people who were told they could refinance? They can't. Because for the first time in a decade, housing prices have stopped going up. You compile a report. 14 pages. You walk it to your boss's office. These delinquency curves are steepening faster than any model predicted. If this continues through Q2, he holds up his hand. How's the desk doing? The desk is up 38%. Then I don't understand the problem. The problem is the underlying. The desk is up 38%. Take a walk. Get some coffee. Maybe recalibrate your model. You leave the office holding 14 pages of the future. Nobody wants to read it. Across the country, a handful of people have read it. You have a mortgage, a daughter in 2nd grade, and $340,000 in Lehman stock in your retirement account. Michael Burry spent months reading individual mortgage documents, not summaries, the actual documents. He realized a terrifying percentage were fraudulent. Steve Eisman visited Florida, drove through subdivisions where every 3rd house was empty. He came back convinced the entire market was a fraud. Nobody listened. The machine was printing money. You don't turn off a machine that prints money, not when your bonus depends on it. Meanwhile, in London, a division of AIG called Financial Products was selling credit default swaps. Insurance on CDOs, to anyone who wanted them. Over $500 billion in exposure. Their model said a nationwide housing decline was essentially impossible. So they set aside almost nothing to pay claims. The model said it couldn't happen. So they acted like it couldn't happen. In June 2007, 2 hedge funds at Bear Stearns that were loaded with subprime CDOs collapsed. Completely. The market shrugged. Because the company encouraged employees to hold company stock. Contained, they called it. An isolated event. Nothing systemic. It was not contained. It was the first 2 blocks falling from a Jenga tower made of gasoline-soaked newspaper. And everyone at the table was still trying to play. And you believed them. All weekend, you've been in the building. The rumor, someone will buy the firm. Bank of America. Barclays. Someone. Dick Fuld has been on the phone for 72 hours. He's called Hank Paulson at Treasury so many times that Paulson's staff started screening calls. Is it Bank of America? They went with Merrill Lynch. Barclays? The British regulators won't approve it. So who's Sunday night? The answer arrives. Nobody. Nobody is buying Lehman Brothers. Monday morning, September 15th. You walk into 745 7th Avenue for the last time. The lobby is full of people carrying boxes, desk photos, coffee mugs, a 6-year career stuffed into cardboard. 25,000 employees. Security guards who said good morning to you for 6 years can't look you in the eye. Your $340,000 in Lehman stock is now worth $0. Not approximately zero. And then the world breaks. Iceland's entire banking system collapsed. Ireland nearly bankrupted itself. Spain's unemployment hit 25%. Lehman's bankruptcy triggers a chain reaction that makes every nightmare scenario look optimistic. Money market funds, the thing your grandmother puts her savings in because it's safe as cash, break the buck. Banks stop lending to each other. The circulatory system of global finance freezes solid. Companies that need short-term loans to make payroll can't get them. Not because they're broke, because nobody trusts anyone anymore. Tuesday, AIG gets an $85 billion emergency loan from the Federal. The company that insured $500 billion in CDOs without setting aside money to pay. A week later, another $38 billion. Then another $60 billion. The government just nationalized the world's largest insurance company. But here's where the camera moves. Away from the glass towers. Down to the street. Miguel and Sandra, Cleveland. First home, 2006. 3-bedroom colonial. Adjustable rate. 2 years at $1,100 a month. In 2008, the rate adjusted. Payment jumped to $2,200. They called the bank to refinance, like the broker promised. The bank said no. House worth less than they owe. Then Miguel got laid off. Foreclosure notice in November. Out by Christmas. Sandra's mother took them in. The kids shared a bedroom the size of a closet. From London to Tokyo, Sao Paulo to Reykjavik, every corner of the global economy shook. Miguel cried in the car every morning before going to apply for jobs that didn't exist. A retired firefighter in Nevada named Bill. 32 years of service. He'd invested his pension in what his advisor called guaranteed income products. Mortgage-backed securities. Rated AAA. Lost 40% of his retirement in 8 weeks. Went back to work at 64, stocking shelves at a hardware store for $11 an hour. A single mother in Florida named Diane. Didn't buy a house. Didn't invest in anything. Worked at a car dealership. Recession hit. Auto sales collapsed. Dealership closed. Unemployed for 14 months. Sold her furniture to pay rent. These aren't statistics. These are the people who were standing at the end of the relay when the baton exploded. And it didn't stop at the border. Because when you sell AAA-rated garbage to the entire world holds the bag when it detonates. Now you're the taxpayer. You're all of them and none of them. October 2008. TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. $700 billion. Your money. Pumped into the banks that built the bomb, lit the fuse, and handed it to your neighbors. Why? Too big to fail. If they collapsed, they'd take the global economy with them. So the people who caused the fire got the fire truck. The people whose houses burned got a pamphlet. The banks took the money. Stabilized. Survived. And then, this part should make your blood move differently through your body. They started paying bonuses again. Goldman Sachs reported its most profitable year ever. In 2009, while 8.7 million Americans lost their jobs, while 4 million families lost their homes, Goldman executives collected $16.2 billion in compensation. Not revenue. Compensation. You made $190,000 last year, more than your father made in 3. And you did it by doing the simplest thing in the world. AIG received $182 billion in government aid. They used part of it to pay $165 million in retention bonuses to the exact division that destroyed the company. The reasoning? We need to keep our best people. The best people. The ones who sold $500 billion in insurance they couldn't pay. Retained. Now here's the number that should sit in your chest like a stone. How many Wall Street executives went to prison for the 2008 financial crisis? 1. One person. Kareem Sarajeldin, mid-level, Credit Suisse. 30 months for mismarking bond prices. 1 person. For a crisis that destroyed $11 trillion in wealth, displaced 10 million families, and triggered the worst recession since the Great Depression. The rest? Golden parachutes, board seats, book deals. Congress passed Dodd-Frank in 2010. 900 pages of regulation to make sure this never happened again. And then, year by year, lobby by lobby, the rules were softened, watered down, repealed. By 2018, the law that was supposed to prevent the next crisis had been carved open like a jack-o'-lantern. And here's the part you should think about tonight. The 2008 financial crisis didn't happen because evil people did evil things. Walk the product to a ratings agency. Moody's, S&P, Fitch. The same rating as U.S. government bonds. You sit down with an analyst. She's been doing this for 6 years. She knows. This happened because normal people did normal things. A broker earned his commission. A banker hit his target. An analyst met her deadline. A regulator followed his philosophy. A family chased their dream. Every single person in the chain had a perfectly rational reason to keep running. Not one of them had a reason to stop. That's not a crisis. That's a design flaw. And design flaws don't get fixed by arresting one mid-level executive. They get fixed by changing the blueprint.